Welcome back to Sisterhood. I'm Tina Hilson, and today joining me is Kara DeMerchant, the pastor's wife at New Life Alexandria, and Tammy Annan, our CFO here at New Life. And Kara's going to share with us today a little bit about her identity story and how God worked those identity moments with her. So, Kara, tell us a little bit about yourself and how God has helped you through some of these things, and maybe even how Tammy did with us. Relate a story to us in the Bible that best fits your story.
Okay, absolutely. Yeah. Man, as I was thinking about just this idea of identity and things that moments in my life where I've wrestled, in myself of who am I and what do I think of myself and does it align with the Word of God? And I became a believer pretty young, and so I feel like my moments of identity crisis have always fallen into my life as a believer, and so I think it's good to just say and put it out there that just because we're believers doesn't mean that we just all of a sudden are immune to that we don't struggle with those things. And I think just putting that out there gives us a freedom to wrestle with it more with God and to bring it before Him. But I think specifically to just a season in my life, and because it wasn't just a moment, it was a season in my life where I was married, I had my little babies, and I have 5 babies. So At the time I had 3, under 3, and we're just in this season as a family of community is everything in that season, right? You want other moms and just a community that's strong, that's also right there with you, that understands your life, and you can have the mommy play dates and all those things. Childcare, just anything for the sanity and community of it. And I was in this season where all of that was going great, and I felt so good about it, and just loved my life and was comfortable. Just was really comfortable. And in that moment of that season, God just began to kind of strip some of those comforts away. And so I found myself in this place of relational deaths. And I don't know, have y'all just ever experienced relational deaths?
Being in ministry can cause some of that sometimes, unfortunately.
For sure. And I think that's the crazy thing about my story is that was happening. My faith and obedience in Jesus was growing. And in that, I was actually at first seeing death around me. Not physical death, but just relational death. There were ends of seasons of relationships of people I cherished deeply. And so I was thinking in context of Bible and Scripture, and I was thinking about Ruth, and I was thinking about how she went through different but a physical death of her husband and her father-in-law and her brother-in-law, and so her story, y'all are familiar with it, but she was a Moabite, and so she was just in this land of Moab, and her husband was actually an Israelite, and he had come over with his family, and they had been there because there had been famine and stuff, and so they followed their family over there. And when they were there, they married these Moab women. And then you flash forward, and there's this death, and you're left with Ruth, and she's got a decision to make, and she's got all this death, and she still has some familiarity there, her family roots are there, her family's there, but her immediate people, the people that were her people, had died, and so she's got this decision, and she decides that she's going to follow her mother-in-law Naomi back to Israel when Naomi heads back. And for me, I was thinking about, even though mine wasn't a physical death, there was this relational death. And my husband and I, he's my Naomi, sorry, not my mother-in-law, but he's my Naomi, where we had this decision to make of where are we going. And so we hunkered down together and just trusted in obedience to God and just followed Him. And so for me, my mentor was my husband, and he was my person that I followed, and trusting that he also was looking to God, and we just walked together. And so we had a physical move as well, and just like Ruth, I ended up in my Israel, which is Alexandria, Virginia. And I find myself in this place where everything's new. I don't know people, and I'm just in this place of obedience. I just need to be obedient to Jesus and be faithful what He has before me, and trusting that while I'm out there doing the work and being obedient, that God will see that. And when I look at Ruth's story, I can see the fruition of what's to come. When I'm in the midst of it, I don't know that that's going to come, right? So I'm in this place of relational death. I'm headed there feeling like we're just being obedient, but I don't really necessarily feel like worthy at this time. I'm kind of confused about where I fit in the picture, because when you have relational deaths, it kind of makes you question, like, what did I do wrong? Did I do something wrong? It's not always a clear answer. There's not always like a clear, this happened and that's why we're at where we're at. But for me, it was more of like I started to wrestle all these thoughts of like, well, am I too much? Like, was I just too much of something like that it annoyed people? Am I not enough? Am I not cool enough? Am I not like whatever enough that like that's why it ended?
Being a wife is one thing, but just added on the whole pressure of being a pastor's wife adds another complexity to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'm like in this season of kind of questioning, where do I fit in? What did I do wrong? Like, and just there was my identity. It just kind of became wrapped up in not enough or too much, and that pendulum would just swing from side to side and never land into this place of just resting, finding rest in him, of being like, you know what, you're not too much and you're not enough, you're just who you are, and it's perfect. And so as I began to walk that journey of obedience with my husband, and we came here and we moved and we started fresh, I began to see how he was just working in that, and he began to just open doors for us and give us roots and give us community. And that's a whole nother journey, like to just welcome in community again after you kind of feel uprooted from community. And began to see just all the places of reconciliation, of restoration, of the completion of that story, just like in Ruth. Like when you look at Ruth's completion of her story, like the lineage of Jesus Christ comes out of that, right? So she goes from this outsider to coming in, and then he's like, not only are you going to be restored and we're going to fulfill that story, and you're going to marry again, and that's like crazy details too, because there's like she marries into like what they call kinsman redeemer, and it foreshadows the relationship of Jesus Christ to us, that he's our kinsman redeemer. There's just so many details about Ruth, but he fulfilled so much more than she could have ever imagined when she took those first steps of obedience. And I feel like I'm still in the midst of that. I'm still seeing my kinsman redeemer in my life right now. And part of that is also going back and letting him reconcile and restore those hurts that I've caused or that have been caused to me, and just letting him be a part of that full story. So I don't know. I look at that and I'm like, man, I was in this place where I felt I didn't know where I fit in. And the more I surrender to him, it's not so much that I'm like, man, I've got it figured out now and I know who I am, but as much as it is of just this surrender that he lets me fill in this space, and he's like, you're welcome here. Like, you're really welcome here. Not like you're welcome here kind words, but like, you're really welcome here. And that's the place I've found here. And it's just so cool to be in this place.
Well, like when you talk about it, and you say that when you had these little tiny deaths that happen all over your life. Yeah. And they are like deaths, because death is accompanied by mourning. Right? So you leave where you're at, like Ruth, and you travel to this foreign land, and you get over here to Alexandria, which is definitely foreigners, all kinds of foreign land there.
For sure.
Right? So it's just a whole different culture, beautiful culture. And you have to fit in here. And so you just tell us a little bit, like when you got here. Yeah. Right? And where you are now is beautiful. But there's these processes and these steps, practically speaking, when we find ourselves kind of trying to evolve out of and recover from. Some tiny deaths all over our life. How do you do that? How do you get from there to here?
So, I mean, I feel like it sounds like, I don't know, almost too simple, but it's not when you really walk through it. It was surrender. And it's
simple, but it's hard to do.
So hard to do. And so
in the moment,
and it's not a one-time thing. It's this repetitive thing. Sometimes it's maybe I'll have like a week or two where I'm feeling like I'm not having that as much of those games in my head over those old thought processes and stuff of second guessing myself or where I fit in or if I'm too much or not enough. But all of a sudden settling into when those thoughts keep in, being like, I need to surrender it again. So that for me was my thing. Like, I was in a season of surrender, and it wasn't just I'm going to surrender and now move forward. It was like daily, sometimes like hourly, repetitive, over and over again. Like, you're letting those thoughts creep in, because those thoughts for me would lead to things like jealousy or discontentment or just, normal things that we as women do. Like, you're comparing things. You're like, well, man, like, if I had stayed, or it looked like this way, or if those relationships had stayed the way that they did, then, and you just go down these thought processes, and I'd have to stop and be like, surrender. Surrender those thoughts. And in that surrender, Jesus met me every single time, whether it was like the 5 millionth time I had to do it that day, or if I went a few days without needing to do it, he was there for me. And in those simple moments of just saying, simple but hard moments of saying, God, I give you those thoughts and I repent of them, he would meet me there. Honestly, like, truly had never felt so weak and so strong at the same time, where like kind of like an emotional like paradox of, I'm so vulnerable and I'm so exhausted and I'm so broken, but at the same time I've never felt stronger in who he has called me to be and who he says I am. And so that's where I started to just kind of lean into that and be like, oh man, like, he's doing something. And I feel like, I don't know, that's like a whole nother topic, but when you look at that and it kind of makes you look and say, with that surrender, man, what the enemy meant for bad, the Lord will use for good. So, God doesn't really want us going through those brokenness of broken relationships and all those things, but with surrender, he can redeem them and he can reconcile them and he can use them for good. And so that's what I began to see. And I feel like that's what you see with Ruth. Like, there was all that brokenness and hurt. And even though it doesn't really expand on that, when you go through that time of death, you see it more in Naomi, her mother-in-law's story, than you do in Ruth. Hers was just this obedience of just hunkering down and being like, following. But it's there. You can't experience that type of loss and uncertainty. You can't leave your homeland, your family, and all that stuff without feeling those things. And to watch her obedience and surrender flourish into the life that it did, it's just, it's a powerful reminder to just keep surrendering in those moments when you feel like, I don't know if I've got it today, Jesus. I don't know if I think I'm just going to settle into this idea that just not enough. This isn't, And he's like, nope, surrender it again.
Yeah. And I think that it's important, like when you talk about surrendering it up to him, because vulnerability, once you've been vulnerable and you create community and then you lose it, then you say, well, that didn't work. Why am I going to do that again? That sure didn't work. And so here you are, you're still back in church. You didn't quit on church. Right? You didn't quit on the calling that God had for you there. The calling shifted to here. The call didn't change, the location did. Right? And then you have to come here and be vulnerable. There's a point that you have to say, I can't just huddle up, close up, and say, I'm not going to do that again. You have to open up. And so how did you get through to say, all right, Lord, it's time for me to open up and to recreate community again? Because that's what he calls us for. Knownness, not aloneness.
Yeah, I feel like I'm still walking that out, and probably will continually, right? Because it's a cycle of our human nature to, we don't all get it right perfectly all the time. Like, we say the wrong thing, we do the wrong thing. And I think it's just a decision for me daily. Like, there are some days where it's harder to make that decision. But for me, sisterhood has been such a healing part of that. It's been the coolest thing to have people like Tina just call out the life. And I think that's what I've learned the most from sisterhood is, like, we all know that it's way easier to pull out the be critical of each other, to pull out the things that we don't really care for each other, and it's so much harder to just always call forth the truth and edify and empower those things that we see as truth and life in each other. But settling into this environment here, that's what y'all do here. You guys call forth life. You speak into that. You see a gifting there, and you just like champion it and draw it out. And so that for me has been really healing, and it's taught me its importance of doing the same. So now I turn around to the ladies in my circle, in Alexandria, and there's going to be times where we annoy each other, but we got to call out those truths, those things that we see, those giftings we see, and empower one another, because there's way too many of us just being critical of each other. So I think for me, I'm still in that season of allowing myself to be open, asking myself what that looks like, but sisterhood has played a key role in that, and I think that's why I love it so much, and I love being able to do this and hopefully have those conversations that reach them so that they can be like, man, I gotta do some of that too and find some of that, because it's important.
Amen.
Well,
Amen.
I definitely have seen from the beginning we started our sisterhood, and just how I've encouraged you a little bit. I think you should do this and this, and you have been obedient. But I've seen God continue to just, I've watched you blossom, and just seeing what God is doing in you and through you even has been so refreshing and exciting to me. And just to see just how you have stepped up in leadership, and girl, I've heard you speak, and so you're pretty good. So who knows what God might continue to do in your life. But anyway, thank you so much for sharing your story, and for just being vulnerable to some of those things. And you're right, it's all about surrender. And Pastor Mike tells us that often, about how we need to constantly be surrendering. And so anyway, well, thank you for joining us, and we will have more to share with you on sisterhood. I'm looking forward to our next time together. Have a great week.
You are